All right, so are you ready for this? We're going deep, deep into a part of history that you probably haven't heard much about.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, we're going to explore Nakam.
Okay.
This was a group of Jewish Holocaust survivors.
Mm-hmm.
And after the war, they were looking for a very specific type of justice.
Okay.
Revenge.
Wow.
Yeah. And we're going to be using excerpts from a Dutch language article for this.
Interesting.
It offers like a really unique European perspective on this whole thing.
It is interesting, isn't it? You know, most people know about the Nuremberg trials.
Right.
But Nakam's story, not so much.
Yeah.
Like, it really forces us to look at those raw emotions of survivors,
Mm-hmm.
you know, after they face something just unimaginable.
Absolutely makes you wonder what happens when, like, the official channels of justice just don't feel adequate.
Right.
It's 1945.
Right.
The war is over,
Yeah.
but the sheer scale of the Nazi crimes is just starting to sink in.
Mm.
Allied estimates suggested that over 13 million Germans could have been implicated
Wow.
in the horrors of the regime.
Think about that number for a sec. 13 million.
Yeah,
That's a huge part of the German population.
it's massive.
And the Nuremberg trials, you know, as important as they were, symbolically, they could only address a tiny fraction
Right.
of all the people involved.
That must have been so frustrating for survivors,
Yeah.
you know, just knowing that so many people who were complicit in
Absolutely.
the Holocaust just seemed to escape any real consequences.
Exactly. Many perpetrators, from, you know, concentration camp guards to those who helped to orchestrate the Holocaust, they just went back to their lives.
Wow.
And this is where this key figure emerges, Abba Kovner.
Okay, so tell me about Kovner. What was he like?
Well, he was a poet and a former partisan leader.
Huh?
He'd actually been part of the Vilna Ghetto uprising
Ah.
and fought as a partisan, so he'd seen the most brutal side of the war firsthand.
Right.
And these experiences, along with his very deep religious convictions,
Mm.
led him to believe that the only way to truly heal from the Holocaust was through retribution.
So he believed in an eye for an eye.
Like it says in Exodus.
Precisely.
Yeah, that's
He felt it wasn't about like personal vengeance,
Right.
but about balancing the scales of justice, righting a cosmic wrong.
Okay.
And this belief is what gave birth to Nakam,
And Nakam means...
revenge in Hebrew.
Okay, so Nakam was more than just Kovner then.
Oh, yeah.
It was a whole group.
It was an organization,
Okay.
a clandestine organization made up of about 50 former partisans.
Wow.
They were united by their trauma,
Yeah.
and as they saw it, their hunger for justice.
Okay.
And their initial Plan A
Mm-hmm.
was incredibly ambitious.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to poison the water supply
What?
of major German cities.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Their goal? To kill 6 million German citizens.
6 million to mirror the number of Jews murdered in the Holocaust? That's a chilling parallel.
It is.
It raises a lot of questions, doesn't it? Like, they were willing to inflict that same kind of mass suffering that they had endured.
It's very complex, ethically speaking.
You know, how do you grapple with the idea of collective guilt?
Yeah.
Can an entire nation be held accountable
Right.
for the actions of its government and its people?
It's a huge question.
It is.
Wow.
And is it ever justified to use the same methods of violence that were used against you?
Right.
You know, these are questions that Nakam forces us to confront.
So did they actually try to carry out Plan A?
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
The article goes into the incredible lengths that they went to,
Wow.
securing huge amounts of arsenic,
Mhm.
smuggling it into Europe. They even approached prominent figures like Chaim Weizmann, who later became the first president of Israel.
Wait, so the future president of Israel might have been involved in this?
Well, that's where things get a bit murky.
Okay.
Historians debate whether Weizmann knew the full extent of their plan.
Okay.
Kovner, however, always insisted that Weizmann was on board.
So they had the arsenic. They maybe had some powerful people turning a blind eye. What happened next?
Well, Kovner himself boarded the British ship Champollion, disguised as a simple traveler. He was carrying 50 kilos of arsenic hidden in containers of milk powder.
Wow.
But just before reaching France, he was suddenly summoned by the British military police.
Oh, no.
He panicked, and he threw the arsenic overboard.
Oh, my gosh. He must have been terrified.
He was.
Do we know why the British stopped him?
That's still a mystery.
Really?
Kovner was detained, but on suspicion of being part of a completely different Jewish organization
Huh.
that was fighting against British rule in Palestine.
Okay.
He was eventually released, but the whole incident force Nakam to abandon Plan A
Right.
and come up with a new strategy.
And that brings us to Plan B.
Yes.
This is where their focus shifted from that mass attack
Right.
to something much more targeted.
Mm-hmm.
The poisoning of bread meant for SS prisoners at Stalag 13,
Exactly.
a camp near Nuremberg.
And it's important to understand that Stalag 13 wasn't just any POW camp.
Okay.
This one specifically held SS officers,
Right.
those who had been directly responsible for carrying out the atrocities of the Holocaust. Yeah.
So for Nakam, this wasn't about random revenge. It was about targeting those they believed deserved punishment.
That's a really important point.
It is.
It wasn't just about striking back at any German. It was about holding specific individuals accountable.
Exactly. And to carry out this plan, they needed someone on the inside.
Okay.
Enter Liebke Distel,
Okay.
a young Nakam member
Mm-hmm.
who managed to infiltrate the camp bakery.
Wow.
He pretended to be someone wanting to learn the trade. Can you imagine the mental and emotional toll that must have taken?
Oh, my God.
To work alongside former enemies, baking bread for them while secretly plotting their demise.
That's like straight out of a spy movie or something.
It is.
Yeah.
The article really highlights the meticulous planning that went into this operation.
Oh, wow.
They chose a night with a full moon so they could see better.
Uh-huh.
They exploited the fact that the bakery made a double batch of bread on Saturdays.
Oh, interesting.
And they specifically targeted the rye bread that was only eaten by the SS prisoners. So they were taking every precaution they could to make sure that it only affected the SS officers and minimized the risk to the other prisoners.
Right.
That level of planning is both impressive and chilling.
It is.
So what happened next? Did they pull it off?
Well, that's where we'll pick up when we come back.
Oh, come on.
But I want to leave you with a question before we do.
Okay.
If you were in Nakam's position, knowing what they knew, having seen what they saw,
Yeah.
what would you have done?
Ooh, that's a tough question to answer, you know?
Yeah.
It's easy to judge from a distance, but actually being in their shoes, you know, having lived through the horrors of the Holocaust,
Yeah.
it's hard to say what choices any of us would have made.
Right.
But let's get back to the story.
Sure.
You left us hanging.
I did.
Did their plan at Stalag 13 actually succeed?
Well, the aftermath of that poisoning is where things get really interesting and controversial.
Okay.
So picture the scene at Stalag 13.
Okay.
Prisoners start falling ill. Chaos erupts. American authorities are trying to figure out what's happening,
Right.
contain the situation, but the exact number of SS prisoners who died
Yeah.
is still a mystery.
I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
There were conflicting reports.
Exactly.
Some accounts claim hundreds died, while others suggested there were no fatalities at all.
That's right. And this is where the possibility of a cover-up
Ooh.
comes into play.
Yeah.
Some researchers believe that maybe the Americans,
Mhm.
to avoid a huge international incident, might have downplayed the true scale of the poisoning.
Wow.
There's no official confirmation from any government,
Really?
just a lot of whispers and conflicting accounts.
So we may never know the real impact
We may never know.
of Plan B.
Right.
Right. Wow. It sounds like there were mixed reactions,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
among the Nakam members themselves.
Yeah, some members were disappointed with the, limited or at least unclear results.
Mm-hmm.
Others seemed to find a sense of closure in the act itself, regardless of the outcome. And we have to remember, these were individuals who had been through unimaginable trauma.
Of course.
Their quest for justice, their need for revenge, it was fueled by something very primal, very human.
It makes you think about that psychological burden
Yeah.
of carrying out an operation like that.
Yeah.
Just putting the ethical questions aside for a moment, just the weight of it all.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that for some members of Nakam, their activities didn't end with the incident at Stalag 13.
Really?
They continued to track down and, according to their accounts, execute Nazi war criminals
Wow.
well into the 1960s.
Into the 60s. So this wasn't just a post-war reaction.
No.
This was a long-term commitment for some of them.
It was a commitment.
Wow.
The article even includes this really chilling anecdote from the memoirs of a Nakam member named Elkins. He describes how they tracked down an Estonian war criminal, Alexander Locke,
Okay.
all the way to Winnipeg, Canada.
Wow.
Locke was responsible for the deaths of thousands of Jews.
Oh, my God.
According to Elkins, when they confronted him, Locke, realizing he had nowhere to run, agreed to take his own life in exchange for the safety of his wife.
Oh, my. That's a dark turn. You know, they were acting as judge, jury, and executioner.
They were.
It makes you wonder how many others
Right.
they targeted over the years.
That's a question we may never have a definitive answer to.
Yeah.
The full extent of their activities is still shrouded in secrecy.
Right. What we do know is that the story of Nakam remained hidden for decades.
It did. They didn't start revealing their actions publicly until 1985.
Right, just before Kovner died.
Right. And even then, those recordings of their testimonies weren't released until 1998.
It's almost as if they waited until the world had moved on.
Yeah.
Until the wounds of the war had begun to heal, before they were ready to share their side of the story. It makes you wonder what they were thinking, waiting all those years. You know, did they ever have second thoughts? Or were they just completely convinced that what they did was justified?
That's a good question. And I think it speaks to the complex emotions that they must have been grappling with.
Of course, guilt, anger, the need for retribution.
Right.
These things don't just disappear overnight.
No, they don't. It's also interesting that they didn't seem to face any legal repercussions for their actions.
It is remarkable, isn't it?
It is. The German government did consider pressing charges.
They did.
But they ultimately dropped the case,
Why?
citing unusual circumstances.
It seems like even for those who were tasked with upholding the law, the question of how to truly address the Holocaust and its aftermath was just too complex.
It was. It really makes you think about what justice means.
Yeah.
Is it about punishment?
Right.
Or is it about something more?
Yeah.
And who gets to decide?
These are questions that philosophers and legal scholars have been debating for centuries.
They have. But Nakam brings it into sharp focus.
It does.
You have people who survived one of the most horrific events in human history, and they responded by taking the law into their own hands. Where do we even begin to untangle the moral and ethical implications of that?
It challenges all of our assumptions about good and evil.
It does.
Victim and perpetrator.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront that darkness that exists within all of us.
The article also pointed out that one of Nakam's leaders, a man named Harmatz, he remained completely unrepentant until his death in 2016.
Really?
He maintained that their actions were justified, even saying that the Nazi perpetrators should be the ones examining their conscience, not him.
That's a powerful statement.
It is. It suggests that for Harmatz, and maybe for many of the NECA members, their actions transcended those conventional notions of right and wrong.
Right.
They were operating on a different moral plane, one shaped by the horrors that they had witnessed.
It also highlights the fact that for many Holocaust survivors,
the
trauma they endured wasn't something they could just leave behind.
No.
It shaped their lives, their choices, even decades later.
Absolutely. And it's a stark reminder that history isn't just something in the past.
Right.
It lives on in the memories and experiences of those who lived through it. It shapes their worldview, their understanding of justice, their very humanity.
What's fascinating is that while Nakam's story is so unique and dramatic,
it is.
It points to a much larger debate.
It does.
How do societies deal with the aftermath of mass atrocities?
Right.
What does justice truly look like? And how do we prevent such horrors from happening again?
Big questions.
These are huge questions.
Yeah.
It's the conversation we need to keep having, even as time passes.
Yeah.
And the events of the Holocaust fade from living memory.
Absolutely. But before we get too philosophical, there's one more aspect of Nakam's story that I have found particularly interesting.
Oh, yeah.
The article mentioned that for many of the surviving members, the ultimate act of revenge, the one that brought them the most solace, wasn't the poisonings or the executions.
Oh, wow.
It was something entirely different.
Oh, wow. You've got me on the edge of my seat here.
Yeah.
What was it after everything they went through, everything they did?
Yeah.
What could possibly give them a sense of peace?
It might surprise you, but according to the article, many Nakam members found the most solace in the establishment of the State of Israel.
Really?
In 1948.
The creation of Israel. That's fascinating. I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive at first.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, it makes sense. After the horrors of the Holocaust, the systematic attempt to just eradicate their people.
Right.
The creation of a Jewish state represented a powerful symbol of survival resilience and hope for the future.
It was like a collective victory.
Yeah.
You know, reclaiming their agency after years of being persecuted and dehumanized.
Exactly. It was a way to affirm life in the face of death.
Wow.
And it's a reminder that revenge can take many forms.
Right.
Sometimes the most enduring form of retribution isn't about violence or punishment. It's about building something new, something better.
That's a really powerful message.
Yeah.
It suggests that even in the darkest of times, there's always that possibility for hope and renewal.
It does. And it brings us back to the larger questions that Nakam raises.
Yeah.
How do we as individuals and as a society deal with the aftermath of trauma and injustice? What does true justice look like? And is forgiveness ever possible?
These are questions with no easy answers, but there are questions we need to keep asking.
I do.
Nakam's story is a stark reminder that the legacy of the Holocaust isn't just confined to history books.
Right.
It continues to shape our world, our understanding of justice, and even our own humanity.
Absolutely. And while their methods were extreme, their story forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
Yeah.
Our capacity for both compassion and cruelty, our need for retribution, and our longing for healing.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the ashes of World War II to the streets of Winnipeg.
Yeah, we have.
From clandestine poisonings to the birth of a nation. It's been quite a journey through a really complex and often disturbing chapter of history.
It's been a really intense deep dive.
It has.
And I hope this left our listener with a lot to ponder.
Me too. Nakam's story isn't just about a group of Holocaust survivors seeking revenge.
Right.
It's a story about the enduring human struggle to make sense of suffering, to find meaning in the face of unimaginable loss, and to navigate that treacherous path between vengeance and forgiveness.
It really is. And it's a story that continues to resonate today.
Yeah.
It challenges us to think critically about how we respond to injustice and how we build a more just and compassionate world.
Well said.
Yeah.
And on that note, I want to thank our listener for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
It's been a privilege to explore this topic with you.
It has.
We encourage you to continue researching, to learn more about the individuals involved.
Yes.
And to grapple with the challenging questions that Nakam's story raises. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.